And the way plants react to cold temperatures, and when we talk about the fall in place like the Woodlands, you're talking about it being very hot in, say, August, September, parts of October, at the same time getting quite chilly by November, let's say. And so different cold temperatures have different effects on plants. And tomatoes react at one temperature, sweet potatoes at another one, lettuce at a third one, and spinach at a fourth one. And but one of the things that cold hardy vegetables do is they increase the amount of sugar in their cells if they have warning. So if it starts getting cooler and cooler and cooler, what they will do is add sugar in their cells, which tends to make them sweeter if you eat them. And at the same time, it puts the temperature at which they freeze drops, because sugar water has a lower freezing temperature than regular water, sort of like a antifreeze, so to speak. So here's a basic diagram of what this is. But basically every plant has its own optimum temperature, and there's a range around that temperature which it'll grow at pretty well. So if you're talking about growing lettuce this fall and winter, there is a certain temperatures that lettuce will do all right at. And if you get over here, it struggles, either too cold or too hot. It's going to struggle. It may get some more pests. It doesn't grow so well. You get further out in here and it doesn't grow at all. And it just sits there, and just that's why, you know, you think this stuff doesn't grow. And you get too hot or too cold and it dies. So one way to think about this is that every plant you want to grow has a certain temperature. Now, these are temperatures, according to my calculation, that where they stop growing, they don't die like they necessarily at 90 degrees, but they don't grow above that. 83% of common supermarket vegetables don't grow above 90 degrees. 61 above 80 degrees. Of less common vegetables, it's like this also. Herbs, 13% of them don't grow above 80, and so on. And then if you look down here at these different airports that have long track records, these are average high temperatures between 2007, 2017. Intercontinental Airport, which is probably the nearest place to the Woodlands versus College Station. Intercontinental averages high temperatures. It has only 7 months in the year that are less than 85 degrees. And so you're looking at, you know, a bunch of these things, but there's going to be vegetables that won't grow in your area like 5 months every year. And so it's something to understand. And the only way you could combat that is by growing them for a longer period of time, or putting them in air conditioning or something or other while they're transplants. Let's look at our climate. First thing is that even traditionally, there was a huge range of temperatures from Galveston to, say, someplace like Crockett. And also, urban areas are much warmer than surrounding areas. And like there's about a 7-degree difference between central Houston, let's say, and some state park out in Fort Bend or somewhere. And there are huge differences day to night, and year to year. Winters are much cooler during El Nino years. Even in the same yard, you can track as much as 7 to 11 degree differences between the warmest and coldest places on the same lot. And there's other things that go on here. Areas near the Gulf heat up late, and areas inland like the Woodlands heat up earlier in the spring. So in like May, you're going to find Galveston a lot cooler than in the middle of the day than the Woodlands. And in November, you're going to find Galveston much warmer than the Woodlands. And then, of course, there's a question of how dense the population is in your area. And one could talk about why that is, but if it's very urban, it's going to be warmer than if it's very rural, and so on. So I want you to look at some of these temperatures. I did a pretty exhaustive study of what this was, 28 different sites in Southeast Texas. And these are temperatures. This is the average high temperature between 2007 and 17. I'm not interested in what it did 30 years ago. I'm interested in what it did recently. Average temperature in January in Galveston, 62 in the day and 49 at night. And the average lowest temperature was 34 in January. It doesn't actually typically freeze on Galveston Island in the wintertime. And if you go down here to Conroe, they're getting a freeze on average every November and December and January and February and March. So, excuse me. So, and this is probably, these places are probably the closest to where you are right here. Some of you may be here, some of you may be here, maybe some of you out here. But these are all frost average months. And what that means, of course, is that anything that can't take a frost either has to be protected or it's going to die. And if you're up here, it means that if you've got a tomato, it's likely not going to freeze all winter. That's what it amounts to, or basil, as far as that goes. And so here you're looking at this, it's not very cold. If you could protect just a few days, you might be able to grow a whole bunch of stuff. That's what it amounts to. Whereas in Tomball, it gets a little bit, you see, if you look at this, the low temperature here is 34, 29, at Hobby, 27, 25, 23. 23 in Conroe. So that's the average. Some years are going to be colder, some years be warmer. So basically, to make some summarizations here, the maritime areas near the Gulf and Bay are cooler in the day and warmer at night than further inland. That's typically the case year-round, but there's not much difference in the wintertime between the high temperature in Galveston and the high temperature in Crockett. But there's a big difference in the summertime. Late fall and winter, the maritime areas are warmer than inland, both night and day. And in late spring, maritime areas are cooler than the interior, night and day. So that means Galveston has a very long, high quality vegetable season, and the further you get away from the Gulf, the worse it is, basically. And there's some exceptions to this, but we don't, they'd be more interesting in the summertime. Places far from the Gulf basically have very high temperatures in the daytime and lower lower night temperatures. So some place like Huntsville goes from something like 99 in the daytime to 72 at night. And some place like Galveston goes from 90 in the daytime to 81 at night. So Galveston has a 9-degree swing and Huntsville maybe 28. So some plants like chili peppers are going to do better in some place like Huntsville. Anyway, so basically we have Southeast Texas climate, which is very different from one place to another, and vegetables of different sorts that need certain number of months to mature until you get some food, and they need those temperatures for a certain period of time in your place, wherever it is. So let's take a look at some other issues here. I don't want to pick this one out. For 20 years or more, I contributed to planting schedules like this. People at Agricultural Extension asked me what did I think about when to plant stuff, and we basically created planting schedules. I did a number of them with Harris County, and this is one that Tom Leroy created for Montgomery County in 2003. And it basically covers like 35 plants. There are way more than that you could have, but this is your common approach to things, and it works fine, particularly if the climate doesn't change. But there are a bunch of questions like this. When was it developed and who? What would we do to correct errors? How would we know what to do if there were errors? What are these schedules? There's a lot of questions here. And how does it affect the fact that some people live, like, for example, College Station is much warmer than the areas around it. If you're in an urban area, it's just going to be warmer. How does one adjust temperature differences in different parts of the area? And what happens if temperatures are rising? So basically, we need to get away from this idea that there's a traditional vegetable schedule to use. We need to think in terms of how do we adjust the schedule to fit the plants we want to grow and the weather we get. So what if the climate is getting hotter and wetter? It's a good question. So the truth is that it is getting hotter and wetter, and could come up with a lot of questions, a lot of stuff like this, but here is Houston, that's Intercontinental Airport. And the top 10 wettest years since 1889, 4 of them have happened since 2000. 5 of them. 2 of the driest also since 1889 have happened since 2000. So this one is 5 in 20 years is way too often. And there's the rainfall. So from these dates, 1 every 30 years, we had a record rain. And from these dates, 1 every 20 years. And since 2001, 1 every 3 years or so. Whereas the drought hasn't really changed. We get droughts every so often, every dozen years or more. Texas is also getting hotter. This is urban, this is rural. This basically is not, these are weather stations that are not in any kind of urban area. So the urban heat island, the fact that these places might be getting more and more urban. But these are just years. We could do it for months also, but the 10, what percentage of the 10 hottest years ever have happened since 2010 in these places? In the urban ones, in the rural ones, about 30% have happened since 2010, the hottest year ever. 60%, 47% since 2000, and 73%. You see a lot of it. And if compare it with the coolest 10 years ever, virtually none. So it is getting hotter, which is not shocking. I'm sure you know that. But anyway, so we do have to adjust things. So the question is, well, how do we put something in that we can actually use? You need to know what to do in the place you're at, what plants will grow, and what do they need, and so on. The book I published has got a lot of more information on it, but I'm going to show you what I came up with. The temperatures, we know what the temperatures plants need. We know what the temperatures are in different of those 28 places around Texas. And we also know how long a plant needs to have those temperatures in order to produce anything useful. A sweet potato might take 5 months to produce anything useful, and something like leaf lettuce, maybe 45 days, 1.5 months. So lettuce needs 1.5 months at good temperatures, and sweet potatoes need 5 months. So I made 140 annual food plants and what temperatures needs they needed. It's in the book. And places where it's being sold, Nature's Way Resources, which is between Woodlands and Conroe, and Arbor Gate is in Tomball. Those are the nearest places. It's a mail order. The Brazos bookstore in Houston is selling it mail order. But this is part of a very long table of temperatures. So if we take cilantro, which is a good fall crop, it doesn't grow above 75. This is the best day air temperatures. Doesn't grow below 40, but it doesn't die till you get to about 10. So you could say, well, do I have a climate where I could grow cilantro, and do I want to grow cilantro? The answer is you probably do. This is the germination temperature, and basically you get something worth eating in about a month. And there's some other temperature issues listed in the book. And collards, here's collards right here. And it basically says 2 to 2.5 months from seed. And it doesn't grow below 40, but it doesn't really die. So anyway, then you have, you start to put these things together with the temperatures plants need with the 28 different Southeast Texas locations. And what do they have? And what you find when you do this is that you can break it down into the average low temperatures they have each season. So the fall I consider to be September, October, and November, and the average low temperature would be one of these things, anywhere from 67 to 55, depending on where you are. And the winter average temperatures of December, January, and February are going to be like this, and spring like this, and so on. And you can see that fall and spring are quite similar in terms of average low temperatures, and summer and winter are quite different. These are low temperatures, and low temperatures, it turns out, have a way more effect on how well vegetables will grow than high temperatures. And then I translated this into figuring out what zones in different seasons, different places are. These are the warmer areas of Southeast Texas, and not relevant probably for most of you in this audience. So we'll just move on, but I'm basically in this one. So I have a winter zone B and then C the rest of the year. But here is colder ones. And here's Intercontinental Airport. And they're in D, zone D, winter, spring, and fall, and C during the summer. So they're in different zone than I am, for example. Here's Tomball, D, D, and E. And so fall, they're in E, and winter, they're in D. Conroe is in F in the winter, all the way through. So basically, depending on where you are, and if you're way out in Madisonville, I didn't do anything for any of the G's because I assume that it's in the book though, but just D, E, and F are the ones that are relatively within range of the Woodlands. So if you have an idea what your zone is, and if you're nearest one of those airports, look at your zones, because we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So just remember what you are in the fall and the winter, like Intercontinental D and D, Tomball D and E in the fall, and Conroe F in the winter and F in the fall. So you can then put your entire vegetable schedule for zones A to G in a table. And there's a schedule that I have created at the end of the presentation today, or near noon. But this is an example of what you see in the book. So if you take something like bulb onions, this would be if you were planting them from seed, but it says in zone D, the second half of October or any time in November, you could plant bulb onions, and it does not recommend it for zone E in the fall. Greek or Italian parsley, first around the 1st of October, and so on. So that is basically what happens. You figure out what your zone is by either by your average low temperature for the season, or by simply finding yourself near a particular airport, and then you put that into the schedule for when to plant. That is a short summary of trying to talk about climate and temperatures with respect to plants. The longest segment is on what to plant this fall. And we're at, looks like we're doing all right. Are there any questions?
Yes. Could you discuss the differences between using a soaker hose and a drip system in your vegetable garden?
Well, a lot of the kind of Home Depot there's a lot of junk irrigation stuff provided, and a lot of cheap soaker hoses, basically, it's very hard to control the amount of water that comes out of them. So it's not at all easy to use those things. The higher quality drip irrigation is not that much more expensive, and it is way more effective and more water. It doesn't waste water anywhere near as much. Too much water sucks the air out of the soil. If it's city water, it's been treated water. You don't want to use any more of it, both from terms of expense and the wasting of resources, but also it doesn't shepherd it well. Whereas the drip hoses are designed to put the same amount of water out from one end of the thing to the other. And so they work a lot better. I haven't used a soaker hose in 25 years, so I don't really know if they've improved them at all, but that'd be my take on it.
Thank you. The next question is, how can someone have their soil analyzed?
Well, in my book, there is a couple of pages on various types of soil tests you can do. And I think of what you're trying to find out is that what organic is available to your soil. If you want to actually do that, the South Texas Plant and Soil Lab is, it's on the web. I think that's the name of it, and it's in my book as being a good source of kind of standard soil tests. Unless you're a market farmer, I'm not sure that there's a lot of value in it. If you use something like native mulch on your soil from Nature's Way Resources and something like Microlife, you probably don't really need a whole lot of that. Now there's tests for contaminants. That's a different test. There's a soil for the penetration of the soil. You can make a test for that. There's a soil food web analysis of what sort of microbes you have. So there are many kinds of soil tests. What I'd stay away from is any kind of standard soil test that is assuming what you're using is chemical fertilizers, because they operate on a totally different principle. What you're interested in is what sort of nutrients are available to through your microbes.
Thank you. And here's another soil related question. How do you amend the soil when water is not retained in the soil?
Okay, that basically, the more rotted organic matter you can get into the soil, the better. If it's a small amount of stuff, I would say something like, if you have a small garden, I would suggest building something on top of the soil with something like Nature's Way vegetable garden mix or something like that, and use a lot of stuff like their native mulch or leaf mold compost on the surface. If you're talking about a large scale farm kind of operation, you probably want to use an organic hay of some sort. You basically want a whole lot of mulch rotting and gradually creating a high level of organic matter in the top of the soil. And the reason is what that'll do is create what's called a cation exchange with the rotted composted materials. And that'll create your nutrients, and it will hold water.
Thank you. Here are a couple of questions that are related. Are walls of water useful for fall gardening in this area? And how do you protect your vegetables from freezing?
Well, we're going to actually talk a little bit about that in the next one. So why not go to the end today and re-ask the question late if I'm still not answering it?
Great. We'll put that one on hold.
Yeah.
And this will be the last one we have time for right now. Could you talk about how to control fire ants?
Yeah, the book has got a fairly long description of that. I start out by saying that fire ants actually eat an awful lot of pests. They really do a number on a lot of things you would like to get rid of. So if they didn't bite us, I wouldn't have any problem with fire ants at all, to be honest. It's unfortunately, they're really nasty critters. There's really two methods that I use. There is a approved organic method. Spinosad baits are used, and there's one called Come and Get It, for example, that you can find. And there's Spinosad, Spinosad, which is a fermentation product of a soil microbe that in a bait, if used at the right time and right place, will kill a fire ant mound in about a month or so. If you need rapid killing, orange oil works pretty well, especially if you basically take a jet on a hose nozzle and blast the mound with that, and then douse it with some orange oil and dish soap. And you can pretty much kill a mound that way, or at least make it move 20 feet. So those are the best methods for that. The state of Texas is also eliminating it with diseases and predators, but that's another story.
Thank you, Dr. Randall. And it's time now for another 10-minute break. So it's 10:58. Please come back at 8 minutes after 11.